Good morning, everyone. Yes, it is a cloudy and overcast day. It was just torrential downpours all day yesterday. And yeah, anyways, today what I thought we'd do is I found this recipe as I was scrolling through looking up about just different canning recipes, actually. And it was called Parmesan Tomato Zucchini Bake. Well, Lord knows I have zucchini and Lord knows I have tomatoes. And so I thought that I would go ahead and make this with you. And yeah, we'll see how this turns out, because all you need is 2 zucchinis, some tomatoes that you've sliced up, and some Parmesan cheese, some shredded mozzarella cheese, a little bit of pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and some Italian spices, and yes, you're good to go. So that's what I am going to do today. And yeah, I hope you'll want to follow along. So I'm just going to cut my ends off of my zucchini. And yeah, we're just going to slice it. Now, they called for a lot more, but I didn't really want to make a 9 by 13 pan of zucchini. I mean, there's just the 2 of us here, so I'm just making it in a little 9 by 9 baking dish. And again, we're just going to do the same with our tomatoes. Now I went ahead and I put a little bit of spray in the bottom of my pan, only because I really just did not want anything sticking and burning, especially cheese, because you know how cheese can do that. So that's what I did, even though it didn't call for it. So like I said, this is really simple. All we are going to do is just layer them inside this pan and just alternating between the zucchini and the tomato. And my tomato's really big. It said medium-sized zucchinis, and so that's kind of what I picked out. And so I've layered them the best I could. I wanted to keep slipping down. So I'm not really going to be measuring it out like the recipe called for. The recipe called for 3/4 of a teaspoon of is it? No, hold on a minute. I got that wrong. Yeah, 3/4 of a teaspoon of onion powder and 3/4 of a teaspoon of garlic powder. But I'm just going to sprinkle mine over it because they had theirs at a lot, like the 9 by 13, like I said earlier. In the garlic powder, and it said Italian spices, so I thought I would just put Italian seasoning on there. That might just be the easiest. And since I like basil, I'm going to put some basil over it. And I made more of a mess than anything else, didn't I? So now we're going to sprinkle some Parmesan cheese on it. They called for a 1/2 cup. Again, I'm only going to dump. And then they also called for just to sprinkle on top. Oh, I forgot the pepper and the salt. I'm just going to use my salt shaker and my pepper because I'm not measuring anything out. There we go. Now I'll top it. And it's supposed to go in an oven that is 375 degrees and bake for about 30 minutes. I will check back. I'll let you know how long this actually takes. Since it is less, I still think it's going to take the same amount of time. But we'll see how that goes. So the zucchini and tomato bake turned out really, really good. So as you can see it here, yeah, it did take 35 minutes. I just tested it with the fork tender. I didn't want it like falling apart. I wanted it to have some substance to it, and it still took 35 minutes. And about halfway through, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, this is going to dry out, or this isn't going to, you know, get done very quickly. And so I covered it with foil. And that was, like I said, about halfway through. And yeah, so it just took the 35 minutes with the foil on it. So yes, I thought that just bumped this fork that I'm going to taste it with. And so yeah, I'm just going to spoon it on out and see how it tastes. This is very good. Very good. I'm glad that I added that extra basil because you can really taste it. And but I love basil. So, anyways, it's excellent. Let me know whether or not you try this and what you might add or change up. And yeah, I'll talk to all of you in just a moment as we get into our devotion. For today's devotion, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 22, where one of the Pharisees has asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And if you look in Matthew 22 at verses 37 to 40, Jesus answers them by saying, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, today what I want to do is I want to point out a very popular yet potentially dangerous false teaching about this commandment, which is that the fruit of our relationships hinges on our ability to love ourselves with the love that God has for us in order for us to genuinely love others. So yeah, today I want to dig a little deeper and examine if that is really true. And what does Scripture say about this? Must we love ourselves before we can love others? Because if you dig into Scripture, you will find that nowhere in Scripture does it say to love ourselves. Least of all in this verse here in Matthew. If lack of self-love was a human problem, Scripture would address it. Instead, Scripture emphasizes self-denial and humility and mentions self-love as a serious sin, as we read in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, which we're clearly warned. But understand this, that in the last days, there will be times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people. And there are many, many books out there about loving yourself that are written by people that claim to be Christians. Anyways, I want to make it clear that this does not mean that we are to hate ourselves. We're not to self-loathe ourselves. It means we have a humble yet realistic view of ourselves, as Romans 12:3 tells us, for by grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. Now, in addition, we are commanded to love others, and it means to treat them humanely. That's what Jesus is trying to tell us here. Treat people the way you would want to have them treat you. And we are to have compassion. We are to have sympathy. We are to be considerate and even charitable towards others. But we don't even have to like them. That's not what we're told. That's why we can love our enemies. Matthew 22, verse 39, commands us to focus on others, a common theme of Scripture. Just look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. This false teaching tells us to focus on ourselves, a common theme of false teachings. You see, self-love promotes arrogance. it teaches us to praise ourselves. Yet in Proverbs 27:2, we're told, let someone else praise you and not your own mouth. Second, it emphasizes feelings, not behavior. It teaches us that we're awesome no matter what we do. And Romans 12:3 says, do not think more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. And third, it teaches selfishness. It teaches us to focus on ourselves. But Scripture says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. And then fourth, it teaches us that self-love is desirable and claims that the healthiest people are those who esteem and love ourselves. Again, I want to emphasize the warning that we read in 2 Timothy, that there is terrible times in the last days where people will be lovers of themselves. Let's make our goal God esteem, not self-esteem. I hope this might have opened up your eyes. I hope it might have brought understanding to your soul, and it might have comforted your spirit. So anyways, God bless, and I will see you in the next video.